Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blabbit. It's great to have you aboard. If this is perhaps your first Blabbit episode or your 55th, woo, that's quite a fun fact. It's great to have you here. As you know, we have experts. What was that, Glenn? Were you about to?
I was just starting to say, I just hear that song in the back of my head. I can't drive 55.
Yes, indeed. But we're going to blab at 55, without a doubt. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Paul Geiger. I am a public speaking coach and presentation expert out of New York City. And I help. I help people become more clear about the messages that they tell others and the messages that they tell themselves. Clarity is the word of the day. Glenn?
Hey, Paul. Thank you. My name's Glenn Ingram. I've been working in training, teaching, coaching, coursing, if you will, people to become better at sales. And believe it or not, they have to become better listeners before they can become better salespeople. How are you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing really well. We have an extra special. David. I know, but I figure since I got handed the ball, I will turn it over to our extra special guest, the story spotter. Here you go, sir. David.
I got it. Thank you, Paul. Hi, guys. My name is David Pullan, and I am a story spotter. In fact, I run the Story Spotters, and I'm in the UK. And I suppose my job is to save great messages from horrible deaths through the power of story. That's what I do. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Nice. All right. David, I have been watching your posts and watching all of the things that you put out on social media. And that's kind of how we connected, like-minded spirits. So I know if anyone has tapped into the things that you do, there is an enormous sense of self-deprecating humor that goes into what you do.
Thank you.
Which is delightful and it's wonderful. But my question is, for people who don't consider themselves to be funny, what would be your advice in terms of how you find things that are humorous? Where do you give yourself permission to be funny? What would
what a great question. First and foremost, I don't actually try to be funny. I suppose some people have just got, it's like you and me, it's like the Steve Martin Appreciation Society here, isn't it? With our hair. But if we I don't know, some people just are funny. I don't actually actively go out of my way to. I go out to do. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, actually, on LinkedIn. I think that there's a very interesting thing going on here in terms of the communities that we build on there. And I said to a friend of mine the other day that one of the things that I think we have to do is to nourish and to entertain. It's a bit like hosting a dinner party. Yeah. And I think that if you nourish people through the message or the valuable tools that you give them, then that's probably number one thing. You turn up to a dinner party because you want to get fed. If you have a few laughs at the end of it, then you come away thinking, I might go to that dinner party again. So I'm looking for a few ways that I can make people smile anyway. And there's a character called Bernard who wears a fez and a false moustache. There's a story behind Bernard as well. But so there are different things like that. He's a bit of a hapless communicator who at my hands learns to be a better communicator.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Glenn, isn't that a great idea for Blabbit 2022? We just call it the Blabbit dinner party.
Exactly.
And we seat strangers next to each other and see what happens.
Oh, it's a great idea. Because that's the third skill: nourish, entertain, and introduce strangers to each other who are going to actually give things to each other. What a great idea.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm going to check, actually. Everything that's said today stays in Vegas. That's right, doesn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It stays in Vegas the next hour.
Literally, for about another week.
Very good.
You know, I've always thought that, you know what, there's nothing wrong with having fun in a work environment. You know, if we're just going there to be stodgy and work, why go there? Then it just becomes another 4-letter word. And I think if nothing else, if we haven't learned anything in the last year and a half, we all could use a little bit more laughter. So why not just enjoy ourselves and have fun?
Do you know, I completely agree with that, Glenn. I mean, I think, funnily enough, I was reading, there was a report that came out recently, I mean, within the last week, about humor within business and within leadership in particular. And once again, we're not talking about jokes. I mean, self-deprecation is a great thing for leaders to do. In fact, funnily enough, I've just been writing a speech for a leader within the last hour, and there's a lot of self-deprecating humor that I'm encouraging him to use in that. But I mean, purely on a neuroscience level, it sort of releases, you know, when we laugh, I mean, there's dopamine, there's oxytocin, which makes us want to feel closer to each other. So, I mean, it is. And I think that the trouble is that I think we haven't today put our suit and ties on, but I mean, when we put our proverbial suits and ties on, we tend to leave a lot of ourselves behind. And I think the more that we can bring the guy around the barbecue with a drink in his hand to our communication in the business place, you know, to an appropriate extent, then I think that has to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, not to correct you, but my family does know when I have a collar on, it means it's either a video or I'm leaving the house. Otherwise, I have a t-shirt on. So this is my work attire.
Very good. Actually, you dressed up for me.
So basically, it's either Blabbit time or tea time. Is that okay? Good. Well, you know, you bring up a really interesting point, David, and that is, yes, we often think of business as being this very buttoned down, keep it close to the vest sort of thing, which really flies in the face of understanding how important storytelling really is. Mm-hmm. You know, often I work with a lot of people in the financial world. Likewise. Financial aspects of business. And, you know, they'll tell me, well, all I have to do is a quarterly update. It's just a bunch of numbers. Yeah. To which I often say to them, if it was really just a bunch of numbers, they'd have two computers talking to each other. So find the story. Where is the story? And if they say, well, I have a boss who just wants the facts.
Yeah.
What would you say is a good step in the right direction? Is creating the story simply a matter of owning your perspective on something?
I think that it's a great question. I think that what I don't get away, what I don't want to say to anybody is that story exists in opposition to facts. Because facts, I think, are the vocabulary of business. They're the words. They're the dictionary of business. We have those facts, but they're not the. You need to put those words into a story shape in order to get people to persuade, to motivate, to engage in the first place. So you have to have the facts, but turning those facts into a story shape is vitally important. And your point there, Paul, is sometimes it's as simple as having a perspective on those facts and just saying something like, do you know, when I was sitting down last night looking at this, it struck me that, you know, then that's a, you know, in a sense, that's a micro story in itself, because you see somebody sitting down and having an opinion. I think or also, how did you arrive at those numbers? I'm working with a team at the moment, and they're talking about how they're bringing forward a lot of work in terms of creating the numbers at the half year and the year end. And the woman who's in charge of that, I found out by accident that she's a very skillful cook, and one day would actually really love to open her own restaurant. She opened it. She said, "Listen, what some of you might not know is that I love cooking, and part of the skill of cooking is about getting prepared early. It's about getting everything chopped up and in place so that you can actually produce the meal at the end. And that's what it's like with these numbers as well. You've got to get your work done early." Story. Simple as that.
There you go. That metaphor of put all the ingredients, lay the ingredients out, and then you figure out how they connect all together. That's Absolutely. A story in itself. And many people think that storytelling, Glenn, we've talked about this, that storytelling comes out of thin air, and it does not. And I could not agree more with your handle, David, which is story spotter, not story creator, but you discover the stories that are already there.
They are there, and they're flying past us every single second of every single day. What we often don't do is sometimes I think that my job is giving people permission to use the stuff that is happening in their life in a business context. So the woman who's a chef, for example, or the guy whose credit card gave out on him because he and his wife had maxed it out, renovating their house and he couldn't buy a suit, and whatever it was. And so, I mean, these stories are there. It's just people, you need to, the thinking part comes in, is how do you engineer those? Because stories can be engineered. Every story has a point, and the main thing about business stories is they have to have a point. Yes. If you start telling somebody a story without a point, in a business context in particular, they'll be going, okay, why am I listening to this? I mean, that's the difference between telling your baby child a story about Red Riding Hood and actually telling a business story. You've got the point has to be very clear.
Well, and we use the stories to relate because whether we're talking financials and numbers, let's face it, they're boring. If we don't have something to keep someone's attention, if we don't keep them somewhat engaged or entertained, you're going to lose your audience anyway. Yeah. I remember one time I used to work for a good old phone directory, and I was meeting these people for the first time, and I made the comment, I used to grow up down this area, and I said I could always catch more fish with 6 hooks in the water than I could with one. And the lady said, "Where'd you grow up?" Realized she was a little bit older than me, but she grew up 10 miles down the same country road that I grew up in. Her daughter went to the same high school that I went to. And now all of a sudden you have trust, you have belief, you have reality just because of one silly little story talking about numbers.
Connection. That connection happens. And interesting, the thing I think that we have to remember as well is that it's just as human beings, whether we like it or not, people analyze and process the world through story. They, the words come out, the words travel to the ears and they travel to the mind and they travel to the heart. And what people do is they'll hear the numbers and they'll be thinking, so what does that mean to me? What does that mean to me in my role? Is my job safe? Are my numbers going to be hit by my department or whatever it is? So you're thinking to yourself, you might just be saying the numbers, but everyone is turning them into their own story. Our job as communicators is to tell the story that you want them to understand, because they'll be creating one which might not be the one you want them to.
Exactly. So it really comes back to that concept of you have to give before you get. In other words, you have to share and give your perspective so that they know clearly where you stand. Perhaps they will relate and agree, perhaps not, but you're right. If you don't, I think that it's in our DNA to actually want to know what the story is all about. I explain this. Whenever you see rubbernecking delays at an accident, why does that happen? Because we all want to know what happened. We all want to know what is the story that led up to this.
Yeah.
It's not because we're thrill seekers or we want to see any. It's not a bad side of us. It's just we want to know what happened.
It's there. We can't help ourselves. We can't help ourselves. We've seen something has happened. What is the consequence of that happening? It's sort of like there was that. They were driving. Something happened. There was something happening now. I mean, we just want to do that. We rubberneck, as you say. It's a great example of that.
Yeah, and we really go ahead, Glenn.
Well, and I was going to say, it's the word pictures, the story that people remember from time to time. I was quite shocking when I used to work in a sales environment where I'd see the same people every year. And it would amaze me when they would say, well, what's going on with this? I remember when you told me this, and it was a story to explain a service or a product. And it would amaze me from year to year how they would remember little things like this. It was just something, thankfully, I was being honest and saying the same thing all the time and not making stuff up, but they do remember those word pictures.
I completely agree. I mean, it's funny. A lot of people talk about what are the elements of story, and you can get into that, and it's important. I mean, you have to do that. But I mean, at its base level, as you say, Glenn, I mean, the prime element of story is the transference of imagery from one head to another. I mean, I'm seeing this in my head. Can I turn your head into Netflix or a movie screen where you are seeing at least a close approximation of, because, we end up co-creating the story together. So, I mean, you I don't know if you guys have had this. I mean, it's a funny one. You've got to pick the details you need to tell, because some people want to tell the whole story. And I could smell the bacon as it sizzled in the pan, and the coffee. And you think, okay, how is that relevant to you coming up with the year-end numbers? I mean, it's pick the right things. I mean, get the picture in your head, but allow people to be able to create that story from those. Because if they co-create the story with you, they buy into it more as well, which is the interesting thing.
Well, you're right. You're right. We do have certain listening preferences, a certain listening bias. And I really believe that having that strong personal characterization of what the story is about right in the beginning, not a
Yeah,
long-winded title, really does pique that interest, does pique that storytelling DNA. And then if we don't overwhelm, we provide three basic reasons why we just said what we said. It's the perfect business template for presenting anything,
absolutely right. I think
anything at
is
all.
it Kendall Haven, who I'm a big fan of. Kendall Haven, who's can't remember the name of his book off the top of my head now. He's done a couple of very good ones, but I mean, he says without relevance and context at the beginning of a story, you might as well not even begin to start. So, but before you start your story, let them know why that story is relevant, and then give them a context of how it starts. So, yeah, you're right.
Well, that brings us to the feeling of being nervous about being that bold, about really saying, okay, I'm not going to be long-winded. I'm not going to give a run-on explanation of this. I'm going to just give very clear statements. How do you tell people to overcome the nervousness?
The nervousness is an interesting one. I mean, and you know, we all know the stats, don't we? And people say it's, you know, people are more frightened of giving a speech than dying. But I mean, it's which I'm not quite sure I believe. But go
Well,
on.
you know what? It's so funny because when you talked about stories dying a terrible death,
Yeah.
there was one networking event, and Glenn has heard this story where we went around the Zoom and they said, well, what do you do? And I said, I help people focus on their fear of dying. And there was silence. And people said, I go, because once you remove public speaking fear, what else is there?
That's fantastic. That's really good. That's very good. I love that. I love that. Nervousness is an interesting one, and I'll tell you my take on this. And it's actually sort of to do with what's happening now. I mean, we are in we're in a conversation now, and you're looking at me and I'm looking at you. But what I'm really looking at is the stories that both of you guys have told me already. I mean, I'm looking in your direction, but my head is off there somewhere, creating this, coloring in the story that you've created for me. I think that, and this is very counterintuitive, the best way you can get over your nerves is by becoming a better storyteller, because you tell a good story, they've got to look somewhere, and please God, they look in your direction. I mean, if they're looking at their sandwiches, you're really in trouble. But I mean, they might as well look in your direction. But what they're actually seeing is that picture of you preparing the food and getting it all prepared early, or whatever the story is, or your credit card maxing out, as I said earlier. So just because they're looking at you, don't think they're judging you. If you tell the story well, what they're doing is they are co-creating this story with you. So I think that a big part of getting over nerves is about becoming a better storyteller.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when we talk about telling stories, and I love Zoom because now I get to finally go back into my element of being in your office, in Paul's office, talking to you. And the best way that I found to start stories and to really get to people relaxed would be say, David, what's the best book you've read lately? Because I see you have a couple of books behind you.
I know. Isn't that the best thing? I mean, we've already done it. I mean, there's the King's Speech, and I told you a story about, about Geoffrey Rush from there. And, I've got a poster of 12th Night behind me, and there was a guy who knew how to tell some stories. But I mean, that's right, Glenn. I mean, it's the daring, isn't it? I've the daring to pick up on that. And tell me about that poster. What does it say? I can't see. Will be shot. Somebody.
Well, it doesn't say trespassers. It looks like it says trespassers will be shot. You can't see offer day in front of a shot. It is Margaritaville.
That's excellent. And then you've set up something. The interesting thing is, and I've really loved this over the last year or so, where how lucky am I? I'm getting to talk to you guys in Las Vegas at the moment. I mean, where the world has opened up, although we're on Zoom or on this streaming at the moment. But I mean, it's what a gift to be able to sort of meet people in different parts of the world that we've had, if you take advantage of it. The trick is to go from, Paul, tell me about the King's Speech. Why have you got that there? Into, listen, we haven't come here to talk about that all day. How about we get down to business now? It's that bridge, isn't it, down into
Yes.
But the story you've told, if you tell the stories and listen for the stories, and you actually said that earlier, Glenn. I mean, you've got to listen more than you speak. Listen for those stories before you tell stories.
Well, I do counsel quite a few people on job interview skills. And if ever there was the perfect scenario to be a good storyteller, it would be in those circumstances.
Yeah.
So what you need to do, and I don't believe that enough people do this in preparation for just about any business interaction, is actually know the stories that really do define you. I know we talk about finding stories every day. Stories can get replaced, but I don't think enough people do the work to actually determine what are the stories that define me, regardless of whether I believe it'll be interesting to this person because I have some connection, just irregardless. These are the stories that do define me based on certain criteria. And then practice telling those stories.
Practice, definitely.
It's huge.
Get them lean. Get those stories lean once you're actually, once you've decided what stories are. And it's interesting. I'd be really interested in your view on this, you guys. I think you could almost tell in an interview situation, you could almost get a list of two things. There's the professional life and the personal life stories. Yes. Which are you going to tell? Because both of them are relevant. And there's often that question. So tell me a bit about Paul. And you think you do the temptation to run through your curriculum vitae and your biog is just hot, and nobody cares about that. No. And I mean, I often tell this story. There was a guy who I was coaching for an internal promotion, actually. And we were talking, and I said, "What's the thing that you're most proud of doing that you never thought you could do?" And he said, "Well, I've essentially built my own house based on YouTube videos." And I went, "What?" And he said, yeah, I just love it. I sort of get on YouTube and I look about the plumbing and the wiring and sort of like the little cornicing and the plastering and everything. Said the whole thing. I know every single inch of this place. Wow. And as he was telling that story, the things I inferred about him being a self-starter, about sort of like being really interested in detail. And I said, you can make those points and you can say I am this sort of person. But that story, if you tell that story well, people are just going to get it.
Well, and there's a reason for that too. And it goes back to listening behaviors. We need to have a certain number of boxes checked, especially in business, in order to want to move forward, to be in a place of trust. And basically, you need to have experience, aspiration, and ability. Yeah. And you tell a story like that, one story checks 4 boxes.
That's so true. And that word trust that you mentioned there, there's an interesting thing. Do you know the book, The Trusted Advisor? Have you ever come across that book? So The Trusted Advisor, there's the equation in there of what equals trust. And it goes something like credibility plus reliability plus vulnerability divided by self-orientation or self-interest. So the credibility is, can you do your job? Yes, you can. Yeah. Do you do your job? Are you reliable? Yes, you do. But what does vulnerability mean? And I think that story is a vulnerable act. To tell a story is a vulnerable act in itself without you having to do a big woe is me thing, which I would never recommend. But I mean, just actually sort of opening people up into the parts of your life that you're fine with, but actually show a bit of you. And then it comes back to something you said earlier about it being a gift, about giving it over. So the self-orientation, I'm doing this in service to you to let you know more about me. And I think that's I agree. Story it's why I do it. It's just great.
Exactly. Now, Glenn, what is the story that I constantly tout here on Blabbit? Not my story, but just in general. What do I say is
the mentor story?
The most powerful story you can tell is the mentor story.
Yeah, it really, really is.
Because it leans right into what you were talking about, David, which is vulnerability. You're talking about somebody else.
Yeah.
But in order to talk about somebody else, anything you say about that person, you noticed about them, therefore you are talking about yourself.
I completely agree. Make yourself into Yoda, not Luke Skywalker.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and when we start talking about storytelling, I think it's always good. And as a lot of comedians will profess, you need to know your audience. because the story that I tell to one audience may be a slightly different version or from a different perspective that I tell audience B.
Yeah.
So getting to read the people who you're talking to. I mean, you mentioned a little bit with the interview. If I'm doing an interview for an HR position, I'm probably going to have a little different perspective than if I'm doing an interview from a sales perspective.
Exactly right.
Quick example, my last time I had a JOB, I did an interview about 20 years ago for a sales position that had a training class. And so at the end, I sold the interviewer and said, what do I have to do to get me in this training class so I can be prepared for this?
Mm-hmm.
But they wanted closers. They wanted salespeople. I wouldn't do that if I'm applying for an HR position or some other type of position like that. So can you talk a little bit about reading the audience and knowing how to tell a story from different perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. It's actually just putting yourself in their shoes and thinking, what are their pain points? What is it that they're trying to solve at the moment? And if you can tell a story that's actually going to hit those points, then that's it's gold dust, really. I mean, it's interesting. I heard a story by a guy who was doing his MBA probably about 18 months ago now, and it was in Singapore, and it was a business school called INSEAD. It's a big one. It's in France, and they've got a campus in Singapore. And this guy told this story about, they all come together and they're from all over the world and they're living in a house together, and they were in lockdown. And so they used to every night somebody would cook dinner of a cuisine from where they came from. And he decided, I can't remember where he was from exactly, but he decided to do this amazing kebab in the oven. And they were sitting down having some drinks. They heard this explosion and they went there. So this thing had just blown up the oven. And suddenly there was this picture of about seven engineers around the oven looking in there thinking, well, maybe if we stuck that up there, we put that back together. And so you could tell that story from a number of perspectives. Either, you're a great team worker, I can work with teams, or I love solving problems, or there's all sorts of ways. I mean, and in fact, coming back to the point you make, I mean, I often say this to clients, and I mentioned before about, there's a difference between the way you tell a story in business as opposed to your child. I mean, when my boy, who was now 27, if he'd been 5, yes, exactly. And if I'd said to him, right, Charlie, I am now going to tell you a story about why you must never take apples from old ladies in the forest because they turn out to be poisoned and those old ladies are witches. He'd go, well, why bother telling me the story? I mean, you've just told me how it ends. But in business, we sort of want to know how it ends. He said, I think one of the main things that you need to do is to actually be able to work cleverly in teams. I remember this time when I was back at business school and there you go.
Exactly. I always say when we're reading, it's actually a different mind process because we can read, reason leads to conclusion.
Yes.
But when we're listening, we need to have that horizontal train of thought turned vertically. We have to start with a conclusion and do what I call a vertical unfolding, which is then go to the reasons at the next level. And the weeds are down below. So it's literally a communication pyramid.
That scribbling you hear is me stealing that idea. That's a brilliant way of describing it. Brilliant way of describing it. Yeah. It is absolutely, it's vertical rather than that sort of, yeah. And the other thing, of course, with reading is you get to put it down. You get to put it down or sort of rewind on a paragraph and go, what is that again? You've got to... A friend of mine actually said to me that you need to, with the spoken word, you need to view it almost as an economic transaction. You want them to pay attention. They want to start paying attention, and then you need to keep them paying attention.
Yes.
So that'll be, the surprises you put in there, or the vividness of detail that you put in there, or indeed the way you tell it. Because I think that I've heard some great stories very badly told. So,
Well, there is a disadvantage to telling a story verbally, but you do have something that you don't have when you're reading, and that is body language.
Yes.
You actually get to use that body language, whether it's eye contact or posture or facial expressions or gestures, whatever that might be, to enhance the story. That along with your own personal timing on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's part of my job as a story spotter as well, is about what stories are people inferring about you through the way that you show up, through the way that you turn up physically and use your body language. Because Well, you can go to any bar or any restaurant. You walk in there and you look over there and you make a judgment about somebody before you've even spoken to them. So being in control of how you're coming over, and as a storyteller, well, I've seen it work badly both ways. I mean, you see people who just sort of stand there and they're completely rigid, and it's just literally their mouths are moving like that. And then there are other people whose arms are waving everywhere, completely incongruously to the story they're telling. Right. To actually get it married together, and that. If you believe in something, if you love what it is, let me see you love it. I mean, is it tell it passionately if you really passionately believe in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, and you almost have to become a chameleon, don't you think? Because depending on which environment you're in, which groups you're talking to, again, the way you're presenting it may be a little bit different. Your enthusiasm may be at different points. So if you're not a chameleon and kind of mimicking the people in front of you, you're never going to communicate it properly.
I think that's right. In terms of the energy. I mean, just sort of like match and slightly be above that energy as well. Because there's there are sort of studies that say that people follow the most positive energy in the room. So, I mean, don't sort of come in sort of going, "Hi guys," if they're all sort of actuaries sitting there like that, because they'll think, hang on, who is this person in front of me? But match them and lead them. I mean, we're into sort of neuro-linguistic programming and ideas of that now, where you're sort of like leading the energy in the room, and you actually do start to change the energy in the room. In fact, that was one of the most fantastic things one of my clients ever said to me. She was the chief exec of a very big hotel group, actually. She was the European chief exec, and she said, the one thing I've really learned about as a result of the work we've done is that my number one job is to read the temperature in the room and then change the temperature in the room. And I thought, oh God, that's a great way to put it. I was scribbling when she wrote that as well. She said that because I thought, I mean, I wish I'd said that to you. Thank you for remembering me saying that to you, but I don't think I put it that eloquently.
That's right. Yes, I have been given, not taken, credit for many things over the years. Maybe it started as a good idea, but it somehow became an even better idea.
Exactly.
Just going back for a second to anyone who's concerned or maybe received a critique at some point in their career that they were gesturing too much, that maybe they were, like you were saying, flailing the arms around a little bit. I find that the best governor for that is to follow the principle, the discipline of gesturing, holding the gesture until the impulse for the next gesture comes along.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah.
And that helps it. At first, people are like, oh, I feel stiff. I feel really stiff. No, hold it. Let your words speak through the gesture. And then when the next gesture comes, obviously you're choosing what word that gesture lands on, deliver it. And that's how you sort of keep it together. So it
I can imagine that would help people in another way as well, Paul. Is it would sometimes slow people down. It would allow them to pause because you get to the end of the gesture and then that's lovely. I mean, I sometimes talk about, the difference between, we have symbolic and functional gestures. I mean, we have symbolic gestures because that was great. I mean, it's, all that sort of stuff. But then the functional, my wife, who, we have our business together, which is a whole other story. But I mean, she has a great line that she says to people, says, try and describe a spiral staircase with your hands behind your back. And no one can do it. They say, well, it goes, they start going, well, it's like this. They have to go, well, it's a staircase and it's made of metal and it goes like there. That's a functional gesture. And
yes. And
so many people, you said, we've got this business over here and this business over here, and we've got to bring them together. I mean, allow these to draw the metaphor. I mean, allow all of your body to be part of the communication experience, but waving hands, I just know what had happened in that case. Somebody had said, well, you've got to use your body. And he just sort of, this guy is like, it was like washing in the wind.
Right. Like at the car dealerships here in America.
Yes. Very good. He's exactly that.
That would have been hard to describe without body language.
You couldn't have done it. Describe a car dealership, Paul. Well, there are these guys at the front.
Well, then you have some of us that if you want to put a gag in our mouth, just tie our hands behind our back because we can't talk without our hands.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, it's true. I sometimes say to, well, I haven't said this for a long time actually, but I mean, I used to say most of my job is about getting people to discover their inner Italian, just sort of,
Yeah,
just please.
I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the spot in the episode in the program here where we go off the rails just a little bit, and I would love to just go around our little cohort here and just talk about the chapters in your life that brought you to here. In other words,
Great.
where did it start? What's the journey? Just tag a couple of things along the way that lead to this. Should we we'll let our guest go first if you're prepared, David?
Well, I don't know that I'm prepared, but I'll have a go. Actually, I tell you what, it sort of comes back to that guy there, William Shakespeare. I mean, I grew up in a family of actors from the UK who emigrated to Australia. And I was always around the theatre, and I worked as an actor when I first came to the UK. And so I've been in the storytelling world, and part of my degree was in screenwriting. So I've been immersed in narrative structure for a long time. And like I say, I worked as an actor. But anyone who knows acting knows that you spend a lot of time not working as an actor as well. And so I used to teach, and I taught at this, the college that I taught at on their drama course had they asked me to create a course for business people, and it was called Your Voice is the Business. And it was basically a weekend of vocal exercises and stuff for people in business to make them better presenters. Yes. And quite frankly, it was okay, but nobody was going to do the vocal exercises. And the one exercise that absolutely resonated with everyone was I'd get them to go away for about an hour with each other. And I'd say, I mean, let's say it's you and me, Glenn. I mean, think of a story in your life where you overcame something that you didn't think you'd be able to overcome and what happened at the end. And I would tell you, Glenn, that story, and then you'll tell me your story. And then I have to be able to tell your story back to the group as if it had happened to me. And what you do is you get people visualizing stuff, and you get them really embodying it and really buying into it, because they do it with much more bravery, because it actually isn't their story. And everyone talked about that exercise. Everyone talked about that exercise. And in actual fact, people said, can you come into our business and teach us that exercise? That's sort of where I ended up coming into the business world. My wife, when our son was born, sort of got into it full-time much sooner than me. And she was flying all over the world, working for big companies on sort of competitive tenders, pitches and stuff. And she got very ill back in the early 2000s. She was ill for a couple of years. I mean, she literally woke up one morning. She had sort of like chronic fatigue. She'd been working so hard, and she couldn't get out of bed. And she was in the middle of two very, very big pieces of work, one of which was in Switzerland. And she said to me, you're going to have to do the job for me. And I thought, okay, this is a big step. I'm really not ready for this. Anyway, 2 days later, I found myself on a flight to Zurich. I got there with these guys who were pitching for 20 million francs worth of business with this organization. They were all sitting around talking jargon. I had never felt more out of place in my life. I had no idea what was going on. And I said to them, listen, guys, best acting I had ever done in my life. I said, listen, guys, let's take a 10-minute break here. We'll just think what's going on here. We'll come back and we'll reconvene. Let's crack on. I ran to the toilet. I picked up my mobile phone. I dialed London. I said, Sarah Jane, I don't know what to do. I have literally no idea what these guys are talking about. I'm in the wrong place. I'm the wrong person in the wrong place. And she said, David, you are the right person in the right place. Do what you've always done. Get them to tell a story to explain it to you what they mean. Because if they can't do that, then they probably don't understand as well. I think 20 years later, I'm still here. I've learned a lot, but that's how I came to be here, was through trusting what I'd always done. It was somebody said to me the other day, I mean, a lot of people talk in business to their inner circle of the people who understand what it is. They'll understand the jargon. There's a massive outer circle of people who haven't got a clue what you're talking about. I'm just beyond that. I sit right outside that. If you can make me understand, you're onto something, and you're going to do it through story.
That's an excellent story. I often say to my clients, it would take you so much longer to teach me what you know than it will take me to teach you what I
Yes.
know.
And here's my bill.
There you go. All right, Glenn,
So
are
there
you
you
ready? Are you ready?
Sure. Coming from a person that almost failed speech as a freshman in college and was scared to death getting up in front of people to speak, my better half convinced me about 20 years ago that I'd make more money selling for businesses than I ever would running them. So I convinced the owner of the company to give me a sales position. And about 2 weeks later, they flew me out to the Northeast to go and make sales calls and drive up business. And the first day I stayed in the hotel scared to death to do anything. And then finally realized by the end of that day, no one here knows me. I may never come back here again. If I act like a fool or an idiot, who's going to know besides me? And that was my first step to getting past the fear of talking to people, being insecure about what you talk about, what you know. And now I come on here and act like I know things.
I love that. I
Yes.
love that.
Yes, we all have very, very similar stories.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I consider myself to be a voice geek. I've always been a voice geek. In whatever capacity I've been using my voice, listening to other people's voices, dissecting why that works, why this doesn't work, how do you do that, how do you not do that. So at 15, my greatest ambition was to be Mick Jagger. That was it. I had musical training, but then I suddenly realized, no, what I want to do, I want to be a singer. And I wanted to be, the front man out front. Well, I did that for a little while with marginal success, nothing that anybody's heard about, but got darn close. I was another one of those almost success stories. And then I got bitten by the acting bug and started auditioning and doing off-Broadway and auditioning for Broadway shows and national tours and all of that good stuff. And again, like you said, David, acting is not always working. So I became a professional host, and I would host events, private events, corporate events. I've probably gotten up in front of an audience 3,500 times, 4,000
Wow.
times in my career. So I've already logged in well over 30,000 hours of speaking in front of people. So I don't really have much of that fear, though I do understand what's going on when it happens. I always tell everyone, no one's immune. We've just gotten accustomed to it. That's all. And there are ways to figure out how to get accustomed. And in the meantime, with the acting, commercials, soap operas, movies, voiceovers, all of that stuff, Glenn knows my story about being the host of Buns of Steel. Yeah, I did that one too. I always tell everyone, not my buns. I was the host. But again, getting up in front of a live audience of 100 people and just doing everything live for cameras. Yeah, no problem. What are we doing? Oh, okay, great. Where's the script? Yeah, give me 10 minutes. All right, great.
Yeah.
Let's roll. Let's go do it. And I got to the place where I was at a crossroads. I could either teach people to sing, which I was working on for a while, but just like you, I saw an underserved market in the business world. And I said, you know what? This is going to be more interesting for me because as much as I love creative people, and I do consider myself to be a creative person, I love helping people who don't see themselves that way. And I love to try to give them the tools that they need to just make everything more interesting. It's all how you look at things. And that's why I was so intrigued when I knew that you were going to be our guest, because man, it's all about stories. It is all about those stories.
I love that. I love both of those stories for so many reasons, because I mean, I've been where you were, Glenn. In fact, I've had that exact same thought of thinking, why don't I go and talk to that person? I'm never going to be here ever again. You know, I've been there. You know, there's that connection that I felt with you. And, you know, I'm not altogether convinced that we're not the same person, Paul, because I mean, it's you know, I mean, I've had my buns of steel moments as well, but and definitely not mine. But the other thing, what I love about those stories in terms of the connections that you sort of feel and you go, oh, it's you. I see who you are. There's another thing is that there are little moments that aren't developed that you think, I want to ask more about that. That's it, you know, that I want to go tell me more about what happened then, which is, you know, I mean, I want to know about that band. I want to know about Buns of Steel and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, yeah, I had that. I mean, I did a play called The Woman in Black, which has been running in London for 20, maybe 30 years now. And it was an extraordinary year when I did it, actually, because it was the year that Princess Diana died, and it was and the story is basically about a woman who dies and her son dies and she dies afterwards. It's an old Gothic horror story. Doing that on the night that Princess Diana died was quite an experience, I'll tell you. I mean, the silence in that audience was quite something. Mm-hmm. And then about 4 days later, I did a matinee to 300 school children, Henry Kissinger, and 2 Secret Service agents. It was the weirdest thing. It was a school's matinee, 300 kids out there, and all we knew at the back, we could see these Henry Kissinger's glasses glinting, and these 2 men that basically looked like walls of steel either side of him. It was extraordinary.
And this was in London?
This was in London, yeah.
It was in London. Now, basically, The Woman in Black, it was that sort of the equivalent of Broadway's The Fantastics, like ran forever on Broadway.
Well, it's one of those ones, mainly because it's cheap. There are only 2 actors in it. So, I mean, it's a good gig for a producer. They don't have to pay too many wages at the end of the week.
Right. Well, same thing with that show, which is, it doesn't run anymore. But when it did, it was only 4 actors.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was
exactly.
Nice and simple.
But the stories that you guys told there, I mean, I love them. I've been in that hotel room thinking, I can't talk to anyone. I'm so it's my Zurich story. Same thing. That where do you find the courage from? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Love it.
Yeah. I mean, we have those moments as experienced as we are. We all have those moments. I try to relate that to everyone that I speak to. You know, yes, I've been to the rodeo many, many, many times.
Yeah.
Do I still to this day sometimes feel the vapors of imposter syndrome or just being, like you said, out of my league?
And you should do, because it shows you care as well. Right. It shows you care. I mean, I often say to people, just sort of going back to the acting experience, is that, you know, the biggest cue on a first night backstage is for the toilet. I mean, people, just the nerves there. But, you know, once the lights are up and it's showtime, to quote Bob Fosse, then it's, you'd never know. It's that old cliche line, isn't it? Everyone's got butterflies, just professionals make them fly in formation.
I've never heard that.
Have you not?
Wait, I'm writing it down. Butterflies. Oh, it's just easier to draw it.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you two, for anyone that's watching this, that again is trying to get over their fears. I'll give you an example. Years ago, when I started my company, I was doing my own voiceovers for videos because I fit in the budget that I had to spend. So I would make a voiceover and I would do 10, 20, 30 takes before I finally found one that I liked. Until one time I did one for a nonprofit. I took some photographs of a basketball tournament, and I did one in kind of like that superhero voice. And Bob, you know, the bigger than now voice. And it was kind of funny. A couple of weeks later, some of the parents came to me and said, "Was that you on the video?" And I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "We thought they were, but that didn't sound like you." And now I don't record videos. We come on, we go live, and we just talk, you know, a decade later. So for someone that has those butterflies that are at the top of their throat, not in their stomach, how do you advise them to get over them, to become a better storyteller naturally and not to be afraid of those things?
Do you mean technically? Because there are a couple things here, just in terms of, you know, it's interesting you said at the top of the throat as well. I mean, and Paul, you know, I'm sure we've both got things on what you can do just to free your voice up. I mean, literally, technically, I mean, there's stuff that we can both talk about that. If I focus on the mental side of it as much as anything, I sort of see communication as like, imagine it's like headlights on cars. The idea is that I'm sitting here and my headlights are trained on you guys. I'm giving out, I'm serving, I'm giving my communication out to you, and you are doing similarly. What happens when we get nervous is instead of our headlights focusing out, those headlights turn backwards and they shine in our own eyes, and our own headlights become the brightest and the most critical in the room. It's just realizing that that's what you're doing and going, okay, stop. What I'm not doing is I'm chatting to myself. There's little voices in my head going, David, you're not good enough. Your voice sounds terrible, or nobody's interested in you. Breathing and going, okay, guys, maybe you're there for a reason, you voices, maybe you're trying to help me, but you aren't at the moment. Let's just focus out. Give it to Glenn. Give it to Paul. Breathing, just getting that moment of breath and thinking, oh no, it's this game again. I think is a big one.
We're definitely on the same page, and you were just talking about the mental side of overcoming that public speaking anxiety or nervousness or discomfort, whatever you want to call it. The physical side, like you just said, David, is all about the breathing. I think Glenn's metaphor of butterflies up in the throat is really just shallow breathing. You're not engaging your diaphragm.
Exactly right.
You're not taking that deep breath, which grounds you and begins to pull you back down to where it is you need to be. And ultimately, your breathing is your forward momentum. I always tell everyone, you can prepare mentally, but when you're in that position, the best way to course correct is to rely on your body. And there's just two things: deliberate breathing and then coordinated gestures. Because we know it looks good, but it feels good.
It absolutely does. The forward momentum thing you said there, that's a very interesting point that you make, because it's when I think about it, with nervousness, we lose that forward momentum to the other person, and we sort of go back on ourselves. We retreat into ourselves, and our breathing retreats in, and even our tongue retreats into our throat and becomes all a bit blocked up and everything. And I often think it's a bit. You think of the great tennis players, the Andre Agassi. Well, actually, Vegas. There you go. The Andre Agassis of this world. I mean, even if they were on the baseline, there was a sense that they were trying to get forward to the net. There was a forward momentum to them, and I think that, as you're saying that, Paul, about the breath is our forward energy. Giving it forward is gesture forward as well. Those gestures, give them forward, is a powerful thing to do. And the more you think about that, the less you will be nervous.
But I also tell everyone that it's not your imagination that the lights feel like they're coming in on you, because you're actually feeling the energy of attention. You are actually feeling that. It is as real as the weather.
It is absolutely true.
To think that you can ignore it or you can just mentally flip the switch, you need to have some physical stuff.
You do, because it's there for good evolutionary purposes as much as anything. I mean, I've heard people say that the three things we fear most are physical harm, so being attacked, financial ruin, or being rejected from the pack. And by being a speaker in front of others, you separate yourself from the pack, which is not a natural human thing to do. You have to have the tactics to overcome that, because you're vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there for judgment. Now, those people might not be any good who are judging you. That's another issue. But I mean, but you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position.
Well,
I think it's always we're always more critical of ourselves than anyone else is. And once we can realize to quit being critical of ourselves and quit caring what others think about us, it's amazing how their opinion about us will change quickly.
That's so true. That's so true. And also, this isn't it's not an exact science, is it? I mean, it's not like if you tell a story and you tell it well and you gesture well and you breathe properly, then everyone's going to like you. It's a bell curve. Some people are going to think you're an idiot, whatever you do. And some people are going to think you're fantastic, whatever you do. Just telling stories and doing the stuff we're talking about now just increases the bell a bit.
Exactly. So we do, to go to your point, Glenn, and your point too, David, about we do want people to judge us favorably. We want them to judge that we're driving the bus, that we're the people that they can trust to take them on a journey. But the problem is when that anxiety takes over, suddenly it becomes negative because we've
Yeah.
put ourselves in a position of vulnerability to be judged. And often the combination of all of these things going on turns us into a negative judgment
Yeah.
place. And
Can I
that's
just say I love that driving the bus thing as well? I mean, it is the vulnerability. Is it Brene Brown who says that, when in terms of talking? Because I do. Funnily enough, a friend of mine was talking about this morning. Was about the how public speaking has been, and professional speaking. You can usually guarantee it's some guy who's got a course to sell or a book to sell or something like that. But Brene Brown's idea that the things you have gone through in your life can become a roadmap for others who are going to go through similar things. I think that I love that. I just love it. And I think that there's at this moment in our time, there's a lot of scope for that sort of public speaking.
yes.
People put themselves out there.
Glenn, like I always say, all business communication is a form of public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very true.
It really is.
Or in the words of a friend of mine, you can be a man and you can be in business. That doesn't make you a businessman.
Oh, that's a whole nother episode.
And that's another scribbling moment.
Yes. Well, wait a minute. Let me see. I have my butterflies.
You do.
Butterflies in line right there.
They're in formation.
Right. Okay. I told you it was easier to draw than it was to write.
Pictures, you see.
Yes, it's all about the pictures. Well, I tell you what, David, this has been a delightful episode of Blabbit, as I expected that it would be.
Are we done? I can't believe it. It's flown by.
Yes.
I know. Well, out of respect for everyone's time, our audience, most importantly, we do like to wrap up within the hour.
Important.
But we are definitely going to have you back.
I'd love that. I would love
If
it.
you'll
I've
have
really
us.
enjoyed it.
If you'll have us,
I will have you back anytime. You sort out the technology, I'll be there. If you build it, they will come.
Excellent.
Great. Well, yes, this was great. We appreciate this. If anyone would want to reach out and contact you, what's the best way to do so?
The best way is on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm David Pullan. I have the business, The Story Spotters, has a site on there. We're at www.thestoryspotters.com. And there is a very underused Twitter handle of @TheStorySpotter. So get me on LinkedIn. That's the best place.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate this. This has been a great
pleasure.
time. It's flown by. For everyone watching, same time next week, same place.
See you guys then.
Take care.